So I'm here at AmFest 2025 with the incredible Nick Freitas. He's been a great defender of Western civilization and a defender of Israel, which I believe is really coming from a defense of Western civilization. So Nick, I wanted to bring up what we heard last night in some of the speeches here, and it points to a larger issue. You know, Charlie, a few months before he was killed, started leaning into the problem of Islam and the problem of Islamism as not compatible with Western civilization. And last night, from the main stage, we heard Tucker Carlson chastising the audience, really chastising those in the conservative movement who have a problem with Muslims. And I think if you look around the world, you look at what happened in Australia, you look at what's happening in Europe. On the same day as the Australia massacre, there were Muslims arrested in Europe for planning to attack a Christmas market. How do you see the landscape of the conservative movement right now with this whole issue of Islam?
I find it confusing. I mean, look, the bottom line is I'm a Christian, so and that's the foundation of my worldview. And so my obligation is to love everybody as created in the image of God, and that's a mandate from God. It's not something I get to opine on or divert from. By the same token, I don't understand why I'm not allowed to permit to look at Islam as not only a religion, but as a comprehensive worldview, which is also political in nature, and not come to the very obvious conclusion that it's not compatible with what we generally associate with Western civilization. As I look at our own Declaration of Independence, as I look at our Constitution, as I look at the things that have informed our construction as a nation, it seems pretty obvious that if you wanted to live within an Islamic world or an Islamic caliphate or whatever else it might be, that wouldn't be conducive to our Constitution. And so the idea that, again, I'm supposed to ignore that to what? Be nice, to be friendly? Again, I can be nice and friendly all day long. I can also engage in pattern recognition. And I just don't think, as I look at, I think, the 57 different countries which are Islamic majority, I don't see thriving representative governments with free market systems, with countries that appreciate civil liberties. And so why should I come to the conclusion that it would be any different if they reached a critical mass within the United States? And again, none of this is hate speech. None of this is just, they don't hide the ball. When they talk, I listen to them and I believe them. I think a big problem within the West in general, and we've generally seen it with liberals, but now we're starting to see it with some conservatives, is they almost treat the Islamic world like they're children. And I don't. I treat them like adults who mean what they say and say what they mean. And insofar as the things that they are saying inform the way that they've constructed their own nations, I'm free to come to the conclusion that would not be conducive here. And I think that we have seen that. Now, does that mean that you can't live as a peaceful Muslim within the United States? No, you can. But by the same token, if you genuinely want what the Quran dictates, well, then you're going to at some point have to come to the conclusion that that's not compatible with the West.
Yeah, and earlier generations in the West understood this. They understood that there's evil and there's good, and that people who are on the side of good have the obligation to defeat evil. But the big question in my mind, I think maybe people don't want to think about it, is what is the playbook to push back? Because you look around Europe, they're citizens, they're there, they're having babies. Westerners are not engaging in family formation in the same way. And this is a very tough question for people to face. And I look at, I live in Israel and I look at what we're doing. We're fighting the jihadists because, it's kinetic and it's existential, and we're fighting them when we're calling the enemy the enemy. I don't know what the playbook is for pushback by the West.
Well, I think we're seeing in the UK that it doesn't take a majority; it takes a critical mass, and so you're starting to see various patriot movements within England that are trying to push back against this and recognizes that there's an incompatibility. I just had a really good conversation with Konstantin Christen on this and Francis on trigonometry, and again, I put it this way: I would not presume to move to Saudi Arabia or Qatar or UAE or anywhere else in the Muslim world. I would not presume to move there and assume that they should now adopt my way of life. Now, Christianity is a proselytizing religion. We believe in evangelism, but we believe in peaceful evangelism. I am not permitted by my faith to use the sword to compel you to become a Christian. Okay? They do believe that they can use the sword to compel me to either become a Muslim or to live as a second-class citizen within their societies if I refuse to become a Muslim. That's the nice option. The other option is I just get killed. And again, how many hundreds, how many centuries of history do we have to see this before we recognize that they mean it? And so, I think what the West is going to have to start recognizing is that insofar as people are citizens, I know Muslims that I served with who I respect and admire, and who I think are absolute patriots. I'm not suggesting that we round them up and I'll ship them somewhere else. By the same token, when it does come to our own immigration policy, the idea that we would mass import people with an entirely different, it's not just that the worldview is different or that the social, cultural, economic, and political traditions are different. It's that in many cases they're antithetical. That doesn't make any sense. Those countries would never accept the mass importation of Americans into their country for the purpose of fundamentally changing the way their country operates. We should not accept that as a dynamic either. The question is, what do you do when you actually have people already here? Now, in the UK and parts of Europe, it's become something of a critical mass where they're going to have to seriously consider mass deportation, and in some cases, maybe even denaturalization. I will say in the United States, I think we need to actually have an accurate interpretation of the 14th Amendment when it comes to things like birthright citizenship. I think we need to look very, very hard at our immigration policy, and immigration should be set up not by race, but it should be set up by culture. If your culture is conducive to the United States, then it should be easier to immigrate.
Well, I could see the calls of racism
Don't care.
right there.
Don't care. I'll tell you why I don't care anymore, is because I've made enough arguments where I've tried to lay out my claims in as clear and precise a way as possible. And what I've learned is the left will call you a bigot, a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, a threat to democracy, regardless of what you say. Anything other than complete capitulation of the woke worldview will get categorized as some form of bigotry, because they don't use bigotry in the accurate definition of the word. They use it as a way to try to rob us of our moral legitimacy when we talk. And now they've moved a step forward. Now when they call us threats to democracy or Nazis or fascists, they're not just trying to rob us of our moral legitimacy. They're trying to set up a moral framework where they can commit violence against us and claim that it's justified. And so I don't care if this hurts their feelings. Okay? I can look at somebody. I'll put it this way. I was in a college class once. You want to talk about pissing off a professor. This professor kept talking about black culture, black culture, black culture. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he goes, what do you mean? What do I mean? I said, well, I don't believe there's any such thing as what you're describing. Now imagine saying that in a college campus.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, well, first of all, define culture. And he goes, well, what definition do you use? I said, well, okay, well, I don't think Bell's definition is the end-all be-all, but he said it's society's attempt to come up with a coherent set of examples to the existential crisis that we face throughout our lives.
You said that in the classroom?
I said, that's what I think culture is.
You probably knew more about it than he did.
Well, and he goes, okay. He goes, so what's your problem? I said, are you telling me that if I talk to a black man in Los Angeles and Birmingham and Paris and Moscow and Johannesburg, they're all going to give me the same answer to the question based off of their melanin levels? He goes, no. I said, exactly. So this idea, you're the one insisting that culture equals race. I'm not insisting upon that. I think we're individuals. Now, do I think that racial groups can develop certain cultural trends based off of their circumstances and traditions and experience? Absolutely, but it's not determinate. So when I say culture, I don't mean race. What I mean is, what are the set of answers? What are the social, political, economic, and religious traditions that you adhere to? And insofar as they're conducive with my culture, great, let's collaborate. Let's cooperate with one another. Insofar as they're antithetical, I'm not going to pretend that they're not. And I don't care what they call me anymore.
Right, so there's going to have to be some sort of legal changes that happen. Otherwise, the fact that we have an electoral system that allows people to run for office and without enshrining some of what we need for integration and assimilation into Western culture, into law, I don't see how the pushback is going to actually happen.
We need a proper interpretation of the 14th Amendment. We need to drastically reduce our immigration policy. We need to get rid of the Hart-Celler, and we need to start looking back again at what sort of cultural environments are more conducive for immigration to the United States. And then the other thing that we have to do, and this is the one that's super unpopular, but I'm sorry, if you're out there sitting in a college campus openly advocating for terrorism, openly advocating for the violent overthrow of the United States of America, you don't need to be here anymore. Denaturalization is a thing, and it's going to have to be something that we take very seriously. And I know people are uncomfortable with that, and whenever we talk about denaturalization, it needs to follow a very rigorous due process system, but it absolutely needs to be implemented, because I'm tired of people coming here with the intention of invading, not assimilating.
Amen.
All right,
Nick Freitas, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
God bless you.
You too.